Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's Tuesday. We're back, and welcome to Primary Sources. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to the great teams at CTN for making this continue and happen each week. And I'm so excited. We've got a terrific round today with a longtime colleague and friend, and I'm so excited to be telling her story because our worlds parallel in a lot of ways. And I think for many of you creatives, you're going to find this pretty fascinating. It's a side to our work here that we don't often think about. So with that, let's get underway. I want to jump into our opening, and while folks are gathering, and welcome to another round of Primary Sources. Now, when we gather in a normal world and we are in an audience, whether in a movie theater, in a traditional theater setting, in a concert setting, there's that moment of anticipation. We are there waiting. Typically there's a facade or a curtain or something that might separate us from what's about to unfold. When we open a book, it's that lifting the cover and diving into Once Upon a Time. But wherever this intro takes us, it's this moment where the curtain rises or separates or is pulled back, and we begin to reveal the world we're about to go into. It's a curtain typically. It might seem strange to look at the definition of a curtain, but really there's quite a profound role that this plays within our work at the start of a performance, but it's really concealing all or part of the stage or set from the view of the audience. Or it can indicate the end of a scene, the closing of a scene or falling of a curtain, conclusion of performance, the entr'acte of the performance. It's kind of a fascinating part of the process. Now, for me, it was always fascinating to look, what's going on behind there? What's going on behind this curtain here? Why the mystery? As a creative, I'm pretty typically a curious person. And it's that drawing back of the curtain that's always been fascinating to me, going behind what we're about to see. Now, growing up, we might think of this as a facade, front of the building, or a superficial appearance or illusion of something. We work with this idea of facade. We don't want to see the strings necessarily, or we don't want our audience to see the strings. But yet, if we do, one bad example of that might be a classic moment from a great film where the great line is, "Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain." So in some ways it might spoil the magic, but in other ways it is the magic. When we do pull back the curtain and step beyond the facade, there's an entirely new story there. We go behind the scenes, and it's conducting out of view of the general public, kept privately, occurring backstage. And that's where we're going to spend a bit of our time today, looking at the magic that occurs behind the scenes. Look at the grandeur of any great theater, but behind that curtain, there's a whole new world of magic unfolding. Artisans, wizards, technicians, talent in their own right that we rarely get to cast a light on. And a fascinating teeming world that makes that magic happen all seamlessly and without a sense of it. Magic, that's a key part of what we do as creatives, producing illusions, entertainment for the use of whether it's sleight of hand or creating something out of thin air and casting it onto the screen. The use of this art in terms of the supernatural agencies, and we're going to take a look at some of these supernatural agencies behind the scenes, but behind the scenes of the use of a lens. As filmmakers, taking the camera and sort of turning it on those behind the scenes is a unique part of our story. And quite often, we tend to overlook that, but it is a common part of our culture now. We want to see if there is additional material that we can learn more about the filmmakers and the artists behind the scenes. And suddenly those who are typically behind the curtain are now have had an opportunity to have their work placed in front of the curtain. So again, whether it is movies, animated, live action music, concerts, there's this experience that we all want to be able to go behind the scenes. And our guest today has been a pioneer in crafting this process and part of our creative experience. Her work for 38 years has defined some of the earliest beginnings of EPKs and media production and behind the scenes storytelling, beginning in radio and then early television at the beginning of the MTV generation of VH1s in our lives, working with some of the top musical talent and getting the stories behind these artists and helping to shape media in a new way to tell their stories and expand visually on their music. She's helped to define our collective experience with going behind the scenes on many of our great films, live action, but also animated. And that brings her here for us, the great Laura Gross, who is the president of L.E.G. So it's a great pleasure, Laura, to welcome you to Primary Sources.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's great.
Wonderful. Well, full disclosure, Laura and I have known each other for a number of years. We worked together in our days when the home entertainment industry was burgeoning. It's a whole new horizon these days. But our time together working on various projects of the great classic titles at Disney Studios and others, it's always been a real joy. And one of the great people when you call on, Laura, you know the level of work is going to be quality, top notch.
Thank you.
Let's start, Laura, with this by defining exactly what is an EPK and what is this sort of a sense, if you can give us a descriptive of the voodoo you do so well.
Well, an EPK is an electronic press kit. And in the olden days when EPKs were kind of new, it was that a lot of artists and musicians didn't have the time to actually go and be interviewed by Entertainment Tonight and E! And CNN and all, whatever those outlets were, but they wanted to get the message out about what they were producing. So they would hire someone like me, or me, preferably, to do an electronic press kit, which was where you do the interview, you give the material, and then you send it out to all those places like Entertainment Tonight and E! And CNN and all the ones I just mentioned, MTV, and then they craft their own pieces from that material. Now that was in the early days, and in the very, very early days, all we sent out were like raw interviews and a bunch of footage. Like stuff today that we would never dream would be like our very first cut of highlights or even the whole interview, not even cutting it.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? I know, it's kind of shocking. Anyway, and then it evolved and it became, where they were fully produced pieces, but then you also gave them raw material so they could craft their own pieces if they wanted to. And then it became, behind the scenes on. The very first one we did that was actually part of the product was Lady and the Tramp International, when it was being released on VHS. Remember? We remember VHS, right? And so it was released, yeah. Do you remember Joel Binder? You must remember Joel Binder.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he was my client. He was at Disney International Home Entertainment. He called me up and he said, "This is so exciting because we're going to have you produce a piece, but it's not just to promote it. We're actually putting it at the end of the VHS. You're part of the product." And it was amazing because you suddenly realized your work wasn't just going to be on Entertainment Tonight for a minute. It was going to be in somebody's home. And that, of course, was long before DVDs. And then DVDs came along and suddenly all that material we were producing for EPKs, but DVDs were more in depth so that you were really telling deeper stories. EPKs were to promote, DVDs were to, what you were talking about, lift the curtain, bring the viewer right inside. As Don Hahn, our mutual friend, says, put them in the room.
Yep.
Put them in the room and let them experience what is happening, behind the scenes. Because if you go to a rock and roll show and you love that band, don't you want to go backstage?
Yeah, there's a fascination there, I think, in any context that, um, again, the drawn curtain and voila, the magic begins. But what goes on behind that, getting us ready to the point where the show begins or to make the show happen? And that's always been an area where I've been fascinated, and I've always enjoyed in our time working together being able to cast a light on talent that may not have had the light before. As we know, many of these productions have a long list of credits, and in the early days, many of the talent behind the scenes never really got credit. So it's a fascinating part of our process to finally, decades later, be able to come back and cast a light on their talents and experiences.
Well, it's interesting you said that about not getting credit, because here's where I have to say, I really wanted to say this early in this, so I didn't forget. For those of you who are watching Mindy and know Mindy or don't know Mindy, I think this woman has done more to cast a light on the role of women in animation from the very beginning, which was a very unsung role. She's done it as a passion and with a huge amount of work and research that is mind-boggling, seriously. And I just think it's so great. So I really wanted to bring that up because I think it's so important, and you've really made a difference for women in animation through the ages. And I think that will encourage women who are starting now.
Let's hope so. And it's continuing. There's more ahead on that. So stay tuned. Thank you. That's very lovely. Well, I want to let's go back to your beginnings, kind of how this came about, because you really have been at the forefront of this aspect of our world today in terms of storytellers and creatives. But you began actually as an educator,
Right.
which was again another link in our long affiliation here as colleagues. You started teaching, and then how did you make that transition into early production, which began in radio?
Right. Well, it's kind of, I always wanted to be a school teacher. And when I graduated from college, and this gives away my age, they actually had minority quotas in the LA City schools, and you really couldn't get a job unless you were in a minority. And that was part of affirmative action, and it just was the reality. It happened. And so I thought, well, I'll just apply to private schools. And back in those days, they had newspapers with unwanted sections. That's how you got a job. And, I would just circle people who were looking for school teachers. And I actually called, and I got the answer was a convent. And I thought, oh my God, I should hang up, but that would be rude. And so I didn't hang up. And then they offered me a job interview, and I thought, well, that's ridiculous, because I'm never going to get that job. I'm not going to be able to teach in Catholic school, not being Catholic, And it seemed logical to me that one would hire a Catholic person to teach in Catholic school. And so I thought, well, no, it's a really good opportunity to go and do an interview and see if maybe you can impress the person when you know you're not going to get the job. So I got the job. So that's, to make a long story short, I got the job. But in that year between getting that job and not being able to get hired in the LA City schools, I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And I was a straight A student, sort of type A personality. And I really was suddenly unemployed. My father used to say, honey, tell people what it means when you graduate cum laude. And I would say it means unemployed. So he stopped he wanted me to brag, and it was like, you know what, Dad, I'm unemployed. So I thought, well, what do I want to do something I love. And I want to do something that I know something about. Well, I love rock and roll, and I love creative writing. So why don't I just write about rock stars? So that's what I did. I just started, and I was very young. I just graduated from college. I was very naive. So I didn't know about publicists and managers. It was a different time.
Mhm.
You know, security was basically almost non-existent. It wasn't necessary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was just a different time, an innocent time. And so I would just find out when rock stars were coming to town, and I'd find out where they were staying, and I'd knock on their hotel doors and say, I mean, literally sometimes just hand them like fiction I'd written and say, you know, I'm a writer and I'd like to write an article about you. Having no outlet for them to, you know, but that's how they all started,
Yeah.
knocking on doors and bringing people songs. So they said yes most of the time. So that's really how I started. That was print. And then I met somebody and he said, I can't believe that you're teaching in Catholic school and you're writing about rock and roll stars and you're a radio show. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, I want you to be a guest on my radio show. So I went on his radio show, and KCSN, which was Cal State Northridge, right? It still is Cal State Northridge. And they offered me, they said, would you like to do you're interviewing these rock stars, would you like to do a radio show? So then I did that, and I got the biggest talent. For KCSN, I had like Fleetwood Mac and George Harrison and, you know, amazing talent for a really small
Yeah.
college station, right? And I loved teaching in Catholic school. It was an amazing experience. The nuns were great. The priests were great. The children were amazing. The parents were wonderful. It did not pay well. And that's an understatement. Okay. So I had to always be working at something else. So, you know, and people say, oh, you're a teacher, you get summer off. No, you don't. The Christmas holidays off. No, you don't. Because I'd be like, literally, I remember the May Company. I would go and work at the May Company over Christmas holiday because anyway. So I thought, well, if I'm doing this radio show at Cal State Northridge for free, maybe I could work, you know, and make some money. And I'm getting like Fleetwood Mac and George Harrison. Maybe I could sell these interviews, you know, at a radio station. So I got hired at KRLA. And which at the time was a huge station, really big ratings, and what an amazing time that was. And I started part-time, so it was so hilarious because, you know, I'd call to do an interview, I'd set up my interviews, and people would call back and say, you know, you can do an interview with so-and-so at noon, and I'd be like, well, actually, it has to be after 3:30 because I teach third grade. And so I remember Melissa Manchester coming to her door, and she put her hands on her hips and she's like, hey, Teach, heard you couldn't be here earlier. One of my favorites was I interviewed Alice Cooper. And I always told, you know, the principal was named Sister Mary Virginia. She was an amazing, wonderful woman. And I always told her what I was doing, who I was going to interview. I was standing on a chair in my little third grade classroom, and I was putting up an anthropomorphic school bus with a little happy face that was going to be the beginning of the alphabet with all little happy faces. So I'm perched on a chair putting up this school bus, and Sister Mary Virginia comes to my door and she says, so Laura, how was Alice Cooper? And I thought, seriously, you could never, like if you wrote this as a fiction story, no one would believe it. So that's how I started in radio. And at the end of that first year of working in radio, they offered me a full-time job. And I really had to think about it because I loved my teaching job. But the truth was, honest to God, I made a pro and con list like one should, and probably I've never done it since, but it was really smart. And I gave each pro and con points from 1 to 10. But the actual deciding factor was my car at the time was a Pacer. You remember those? Awful car. And I knew it was going to break down. And if I kept teaching, I would not be able to get another car.
Yeah.
So it was really like, you know what? You went to college for 5 years. You work really hard. You love these children. This is actually a profession that should have value. And you deserve to make enough money to be able to buy a car to live in Los Angeles. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. So that was it. So I went to KRLA full time. That's how I segued into radio.
And then to shape a lot of the real landmark acts and at an exciting time in the music industry. And then how did you then transfer and transition into film production?
that was Joel Binder too. I've mentioned him twice. By the way, he lives in Baltimore now, if you're interested. So yes. So he was a publicist at a regular PR agency, and I had interviewed a lot of his clients. And he called me up one day, just at the point where I was getting a little too old for what rock and roll was turning into, just on that hairy edge. Not that I was too old, but just, yeah, I was too old. So, too mature. I was too mature. And he said, I'm at Disney now. Do you want to do an EPK for our VHS release of Sleeping Beauty? That was like saying to a child who loves chocolate, would you like to go to this candy store and take anything you want out? It was like, and he said, I don't have that much of a budget. And I was thinking, I'll pay you, but I didn't say it out loud, thank God. So my first Disney EPK was Sleeping Beauty, and I know a lot of people listening to this are animation fans will know the great Ivan Earl, who did that design. That was our focus on that EPK.
Yeah.
So that's how it went. And then I was doing the international ones for Disney, but not the domestic. And I was trying to get into the domestic, and they had someone they really liked. And it's to this day, many years later, it's really hard when somebody has someone they really like to get them to try you. And they don't want to go through the learning curve. And I get that, but and I kept trying and trying, and to get into, and there was someone who you also know, Rick Rhodes, who really wanted to try me, but other people in his department really, really loved who they had. And I do get that. And I love when I'm the recipient of that, of course. So one day the person they used couldn't go, and it was for live action. It was for the Jungle Book live action.
Mm.
And when you shoot with wild animals, there are a massive amount of rules. And you really have to be respectful of those rules, because we're not talking about you're going to ruin a shot. We're talking about someone could lose a hand, seriously. So you had to be there at 7 in the morning. You had to follow the rules, and if they looked at you sideways, and I used to say to them, just give me a signal. If we're in the way, we're out of here. Just give me a signal, I'm gone. Like if you feel the tiger's uncomfortable, I really don't want to be there if the tiger's uncomfortable. So we were very respectful of the rules. And we went just to take the place that one day. And I think whoever they had been using was not as respectful of the animal rules. So the production said, we would really love it if Laura Gross and her crew could come back because she's so respectful of our animal safety rules. And that was how I got into domestic. And then they started, because they liked the work, they started using us more.
And I think that speaks to a few themes here. Certainly relationships, cultivating strong relationships to add to your career longevity, but the ability to really sort of service the production and listen carefully to what's needed. And so let's dive in a little bit. And I know we've got some great clips and examples we want to get to too, but let's talk a little bit about the unique role in production that you have cultivated, really, in many ways, kind of coming in parallel to production and being able to almost surreptitiously be on hand to get that story behind the story. What are some of the key things that you've developed, discovered, uh, discerned in your years of doing this from the beginning to today?
I think, what we said before, respect is really important. I always consider that I'm a guest in their home. Like if you go to someone's home and they are a devout Jew, you're not going to bring pork, and you might love pork, but that's just not what you would do in their home. And so I always think that, I have to consider that I'm a guest in their home. It's their set, it's their place. So what do they want and need and expect from us? I also then have to balance that with, I've been hired to make this happen. So to respectfully request and sometimes push, but hopefully gently. I think that once you, and it depends on the filmmaker. I mean, some people are so glad you're there. Some people are really glad you're there, but they are concerned because they've got a lot to do. And no matter how you try to be a fly on the wall, you're actually not a fly and you're not on the wall. You come in with a big crew, you have a camera. People feel differently when there's a camera on them. Sometimes better, sometimes they're really, and sometimes they're shy and they don't want a camera. So, you have to know the room too, and understand if someone's feeling awkward. And if you're in their face, get out of their face, So I think it's that and it's, by the way, that's, you're navigating that all the time, not necessarily effectively always, So you have to try, but if the filmmaker really wants you there and loves and understands what you're doing, you're going to get a lot more cooperation. And then you can say to them, I know this is a little bit of a problem, but I mean, I can tell you a great story about it. I won't say what movie or anything, but I had been hired to do something that another producer had started, and they had decided to use us because that producer had been more in the face of the people, right? And there was a guy who was an artist who was a Navy SEAL, in his earlier life. And I watched his interview. They asked me to watch what this other producer had done. And he literally was almost crying. He was so nervous in front of a camera. How can you be a Navy SEAL and actually risk your life, but be nervous in front of a camera? Guess what? You can. You can. And instead of being sensitive to it, the people who were there previously just kept going. So I asked to interview him first, and I asked for double time. And I went in and I said to him, and I had the crew wait outside, and I said, I want you to know that I understand you're really uncomfortable in front of a camera, and I really want to make this a good experience for you. So he goes, well, did you watch what I did before? And I said, I did. He goes, well, then I can't do it. And I said, no, I think you can. I said, but I've allowed for that because I've made this twice the time, because what I'd like to do is sit down with you with my camera crew outside, not rolling, and just have you tell me what you love about what you're doing, what's special, just you and me. And then I'll bring the camera in. And if you're uncomfortable, you tell me and we'll stop shooting. And you and I can discuss it and we can figure out a way to make you more comfortable, whatever it is. I just want you to feel good about this experience. And truly, if I have a guy who's practically crying and so uptight, I'm not gonna be able to use that footage anyway. But I'm also a nice person, so I don't want to do that to somebody, right? So there's a combination of I don't want to do it, and it's not practical, it's not effective. So we did that, and he was fine. But you have to understand, I think you have to care about people. You have to, like I said, read the room. You have to my job in behind the scenes is to show the very best of them. I am not there as the TMZ reporter. I'm there to, like you said, pull back the curtain, but show, if they're wearing a glittery pair of beautiful shoes, I want to show the shoes. And if they've got a really ugly top on, I'm not going to show the top. And it's not that I'm being dishonest, it's that I'm being selective.
Casting them in a proper light and not I think as creatives, talent they're very vulnerable, and there's a lot of pressure, particularly on the film set when, they may have a heavy day of shooting the next day, need time, there could be stress, production may not be going well, like you said, reading the room, getting a sense of it. Who typically is your point person, and how are you able to sort of schedule to kind of piggyback or companion along the course of production? Are you getting signs that, oh, we've had to pull our location out, we're regrouping at another soundstage, but we're doing some pretty key shooting today, let's get a crew over there? I mean, are you having to scramble quickly?
All of that. The point person varies from production. Sometimes it's a specific person on a production. That's always great, particularly if that person wants you to be there. Sometimes that's an adversarial relationship. Yeah. It's that's their job, and yet they act like you're the enemy. It's I'm really on your team. And a lot of times it's the opposite. It's a real partnership where you're working out what's important. And again, like you say, if they're under a lot of pressure and you're coming in, it's not going so great, you can say to them, look, I can feel that this is going to be a tougher day. let me tell you what I think is most important to get. What do you think is most important? Maybe we can shave off some of this stuff. So I think, again, a little sensitive, it's human, it's actually listening to other people, like, and I've had some really, fascinating, I've had people who are thrilled and really work collaboratively. I've had people who, like, again, they act like I'm the enemy. And I think, well, and they've actually hired me. It's, so it's like, I don't understand why you think I'm the enemy. And if you did, why did you hire me? But again, you have to think about the pressure they're under, but I told you a story the other day on the phone where I had such an amazing, and still do, an amazing, fabulous relationship with Henry Selleck, who I just think is a brilliant man. And I adore him. And, he was under, so much pressure during Coraline all the time, getting it. What it's like. And it's just a huge amount of work. And for the director, and he is on every detail. He notices everything. So he's really got even more than some who leave some of the details to, he's so brilliant. And sometimes I would feel when I was there, like there was never tension, because we always had a great relationship, but just, oh my God, we've got to get this done and this done. And, here they are maybe slowing us down or stopping us from doing that, or wanting to go into a room that we still need to be doing something in. And, so when we finished, the movie was done and we were doing some pickup stuff for the DVD release. And I came in and I said, well, now I'll bet you're actually happy to see me, as opposed to, because I can't interrupt anything now, right? And he said, I was always happy to see you. I always knew how important it was what you were doing. He said, I think that storytelling is such an important part of people understanding our craft and what we do and how much love we put into it, how much work we put into it. I was always happy to see you, but I was sometimes worried about how much we would be able to get done with you there. So that made me feel great, because, and I never thought, he was never anything but gracious and wonderful. But I did feel like, oh my God, we're interrupting. You can't deny you're interrupting. Again, you're walking in with, you've got a makeup artist, so they have to stop and get makeup. And you've got, your sound guy has to put a microphone on them. And by definition, when they're sitting there working without all that, they're not getting a microphone put on them and makeup and walking into a makeup room and making sure they look okay and thinking about their, so.
And people who are not really typically casting a light on the artists and artisans and people, filmmakers, they're more focused on their own craft than they are about being in front of the camera. And we've talked about how it is an uncomfortable place for people who aren't.
For some. And then there are the other people who say, oh my God, I'm so glad you're here, because no one knows what I'm doing until you come. And I'm so happy that people see what I'm doing and see how important it is to me. And, I've found that my greatest relationships are really with the artists, the filmmakers, because they are, first of all, I really respect what they do, admire, and again, want to show the very best light. So they like that. Why would they not like that? You respect and love my work. I'm not happy. Yeah. So, and it's their moment to shine. And I've had so many people say, when I go back, and I've been lucky to have clients who've used me again and again. And, people will come up to me when I'm at a studio and go, I just wanted you to know how happy I was that, you really showed me in, my work really well in that last DVD piece. And it really meant a lot to me. And I'm so glad to see you're back, and that's just like so special, because that's really the heart of why I do it.
Doing your job right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I really care about it, and not everybody who does this really care. I think they want to do a good job and they want to make the money, but I really actually really care about the art and the artist. So that's.
And you're getting to work with people who typically don't get that much edge or attention, but they're so great at what they do. Much of the education I received while I was in film school and then working in early films was right at the beginning of the home entertainment industry, and this idea of bonus features and going behind the scenes, which to me was fascinating. In fact, very early on, I pitched a series idea about at the beginning of when Entertainment Tonight and other shows like that, everybody laughed when that concept came along, thinking, no, people aren't going to want to know about this. But it really is the way we see and experience film now. And that had to have been kind of how are you navigating some of these early technologies, and how are we going to convey this idea of green screen or visual effects, or and then as things moved into digital planes for conveying artistry, how do you find a creative, innovative way to share new processes, new technology?
I think that's a great question. And I actually think it's one of the things that we used to be particularly, I mean, we still are, but more people have done it now. We were really strong at that early on. I had a kind of a combo approach to that, which is, we had a lot of really smart clients who were doing really smart things, like Pixar. And so my thing was always make it user-friendly, but don't dumb it down. So again, there's that balance, right? Because kids, a lot of these are kids' movies, obviously, but kids are smart. Kids are really smart. And if you dumb it down, you don't ask them to reach, as an ex-school teacher, you want them to be thinking and reaching a little higher. So we would always try to do really tell the story, but not make it so complex that it was mind-boggling. And, the technology, as we've been working through our careers, has grown by leaps and bounds. So we've had some of the stories I can tell you is like when we were doing Finding Nemo. Of course, the obvious technical story was how do they create water? And we all knew that's another thing. I always talk to whoever my liaison is, or the filmmaker, or both. What are the new stories here? What's the new technology? What are you doing that's innovative? Because we really want to highlight that, particularly for DVD, right? So of course that was a big deal then. Water in CG was, it was a big, big deal. How did they do it? But when I was at Pixar, the animators kept talking to me about how they thought it would be really easy to animate fish, but it was really hard because a fish was just a tube with a face. So they didn't have shoulders to show, all the things you do in animation to show liveliness, shoulders and, hand gestures and all the things that are the tools of an animator in animation to bring life to what is not an actual living character, even though we know they are. But, and I thought, well, that's a story. How did they do that when, and they then told, I thought so sometimes you learn the story when you're there because, until you're there seeing them do it and then you're in among everybody talking about it. Now I can tell you that this is, I think, a good story about the technology, and we were doing Mr. Peabody and Sherman. And that, as you know, is time travel, right? And I've had some brilliant ideas that I've suggested that people agreed were brilliant. And then they've said, let's do them. And then I've said, why did I ever suggest this? This was the worst suggestion I've ever made. This is so difficult. So I had this brilliant suggestion that we go to the actual physicists who they had used to consult on the film and ask them if time travel could be possible, and if so, how, and what were the theories, and when did they think it could happen. So I interviewed these two physicists, and I explained to them that it was a children's DVD. Did they have young children? Yes, they both did. One of them had a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and one of them had a 6-year-old. So I thought, this is perfect. So I explained to them that I would like them to share their answers as if they were talking to their kids. And again, not dumbing it down. Well, they were both professors. So you're a professor. And they were used to talking to students who were going to be physicists. And they weren't used to telling their children the theories of time travel and wormholes and blah, blah, blah. So I couldn't really get them to tell it in a way that not only would a 6-year-old understand it, but a me would understand it. And I am not a stupid person. And so I thought, well, I'm pretty bright. And then Matt, who's my editor, both his parents are Mensa. And I'm pretty sure he is too. I don't think he's ever been tested. But, we both are relatively smart people. And we would watch like part of this interviews, and I'd look at him and I'd go, did you understand any of that? And he'd go, no. So what we did is, well, we had to do the piece because I talked everybody into this brilliant idea. So I did all this research on like, what is it they're actually talking about, and, read about it so that I could then distill it. We hired a voiceover talent who sounded like a kid, was an adult but sounded like a kid, and put it in very understandable, but again, not dumb, and then hired it cost so much more to do this piece than I ever dreamed. And of course I had to pay for that out of pocket because it was my idea. It wasn't their fault. And so we did all these really simple but fun graphics. So in the end, it worked out really well, but it was one of those like, why did I think this was a good idea? But that was telling a really, really complicated story in a less complicated way.
Well, typically when you get onto a project, you're obviously introduced to it. It's still in production, or perhaps even in pre-production. How early do you come on, and when? How are you shaping the stories? I mean, as things are unfolding, typically you're working within a budget, I would well imagine.
Yes.
Unfortunately, but oftentimes those limitations can force us to be that much more creative. So talk a little bit about sort of typically when you come on to a project, if you're coming in with a range of maybe 5 or 6 ideas. For a while now, I know it's changing. The industry is shifting. But in its heyday, at the origins of this, what was a typical production like that you would you come in with ideas? Were you meeting with filmmakers, getting their ideas, discussing that? Would you not even get that opportunity?
It's all of the above. So I always say, because people would ask me, what do you want to do? To me, the ideal circumstance, which I've had with a few movies, Coraline was ideal. We started very early on. I had great opportunities to talk with Henry Selick. It's sometimes they actually keep you from the producer and director. And I always think that's counterproductive to the ultimate goal of getting the best material possible. Because who's going to know better than the producer and director what you should be shooting? But if you're not allowed to talk to them, you're not allowed to talk to them. So, but Coraline, we started super, super early. We did early pieces for the studio. The people in the focus features was the distribution arm, to just let them like early awareness, just let them know what was being done so they'd have an idea all the way through the awards, and had great contact. That's ideal. I have been brought in at the very last minute when the movie's about to come out and they haven't shot anything, and you mock it all up, which is never as good, but it's something. And then you interview everybody. A lot of them have already left the studio and gone to other things, which of course is frustrating. And everything in between. But obviously, by definition, it's so much better if you start early. It's so much better if you have a relationship with the filmmakers. And that just varies from project to project. And what's funny is sometimes I make the mistake of thinking, well, it's this studio and this publicist, so the next movie I'm going to have the same experience. No, I'm not, and it's like, and it takes me a while to kind of recognize that, well, they let me do everything last time, and this time they don't let me do anything. I had an experience, and I'm not going to say the movie, but we were filming some stuff, and we were in the studio, and one of the directors, there were 2 directors, said, I just think you're making people nervous, so I think you should step out. So we did. And we went into the sound booth and we shot, but all we got was the backs of heads. So it was really not. And when it was all over, it was such an amazing session, and they were so excited, and everybody was excited except me, who was like gnashing my teeth because we weren't in the room. And the director who'd asked us to leave came running in and said, did you get all of that? And I said, well, I didn't get any of it. He's like, Laura, it was amazing. How could you not have gotten it? I don't understand. And I said, well, you asked me to leave. And if I'm not there, I said, he goes, but didn't you shoot from in here? I said, yeah, but the backs of that heads. I wasn't there. And I said, can I make, and he was just devastated that I didn't get it, and I said, can I make a suggestion? Because the talent hadn't asked for us to leave. He was nervous, and I get it. I do. I said, in the future, if you'll just let me get in there and be in there, if you see that somebody's feeling awkward, we'll leave. But don't make us leave until, and, so often, I mean, especially when it's voice sessions, these are actors. They play to cameras, So he said, okay. And luckily that was very early in the production of that film. From then on, we were allowed everywhere for everything and almost never had to leave the room because everybody was happy we were there. I'll tell you another one that is exciting on that same idea. And I'm sure you had the opportunity to work with John Lasseter as I did. He was absolutely wonderful to me and I adored him. And we were doing Toy Story 2 and it was Tim and Tom together. And he came over to me very quietly because we shot the real session and then we were going to do the mock-up where you can get in a little closer because during the real session you can't be walking around and making noise. And he said, I'm going to continue to record while you're shooting them. Because who knows? They might play to the camera because he's smart enough to, and he goes, or something magical could happen. Yeah. And I might put it in the movie. So you don't have to tell them that. And I'm just telling you so you know. But you do whatever you need to do because that's what we're doing now. But so that was so exciting to me because normally the mock-ups are not in the movie, obviously, but they were because exactly what he said. They played to the camera. They were together, so they were doing that, wonderful, competitive, fun thing, and one-upping in that most creative of ways, leapfrogging each other. And so if you remember the scene where Woody goes, bubbles, and he's in the room and he's seeing all that stuff, like a lot of that stuff is actually from our mock session. So it's like, oh my God, I'm actually contributing to the actual movie, So
in the course of doing this, it strikes me, again, as this has evolved, you really had to do a lot of educating to get filmmakers and executives and creatives to understand the importance of what you're doing, the role this serves in ultimately getting product out there, and the bridge that you can provide for them. And you spoke to a few examples. How has that evolved for you professionally? I mean, are your crews, people that you hire, the teams that you work with, the relationships you forge, how are you able to cultivate that, come in with your experience to say, look, with us on deck here, we've got it managed, nothing for you to worry about. How are you cultivating that with the teams that you work with?
Well, I try to work with as many of the same people as I can, because I like people who know how I like things done. And they have to also balance, they're really not supposed to go start talking to the talent when I'm trying to get an interview, so you sometimes have that. And that's like, okay, that's not necessarily a sound man I'm going to use again. But then you don't want that, you want to acknowledge that they have an important role to play and they're human beings who you're counting on. So I think it's, like I say, I try to have the same people that I've had over and over. I've had some real stinkers, and you go to another city and you ask your friends in that city, who do they recommend? And you go with their recommendation and you wish you'd flown in your own person. You're just like, oh my God. And then, there's some great people. And I love when a crew person will say to me, I'd really like to talk to so-and-so about, like one of the guys when we were doing Kubo, one of the sound men said to me, we were in Austin, Texas. And he said, I'd really like to go in and tell Travis Knight how much I love their DVDs and how much my son loves their DVDs. Is that okay? And we were pretty much done shooting. And I thought, well, I think Travis Knight would love to hear that, so yeah, that's fine. But I love that he asked me, sometimes if they don't ask. And then I have a guy who I love in England, and I use him all the time, and he is fantastic. And I still, to this day, he's a great lighting. He's a great DP. He's fabulous. Mm-hmm. And he's so humble and, low key. And one day we were shooting with Paul McCartney, and he'd shot with me with Paul McCartney multiple times. And we finished the shoot, and we're like getting kind of, ready to pack up, not leave. And he says, oh, and I've got this camera, and maybe I can get a shot. And I thought, oh, is there a shot that you're missing that, I didn't realize you were missing this shot? And he takes out a still camera, and he wants a picture of him and Paul, which I think he probably shot with me with Paul like 12 times. I mean, it was not, and it was so unlike his personality. I don't know, somebody in his family had said, I don't know what happened. And the look on my face, I'm sure, obviously I couldn't see my own face, must have been like a combination of shock and horror. And Paul says to him, Laura's not happy about you asking this, because he saw my face, right? And I was and I said, well, no, I'm not. And no, we can't do that. And I hate to even say anything bad about this guy, because this guy's so fabulous and so talented and has done zillions of shoots with me and is one of the best ever, but this was so unlike him too. So part of it was that. And Paul's like, oh, for God's sake, Laura, take the damn picture, take his camera and take the picture. I was like, okay, but it was just like, and it was so funny because he said to me, I'm so sorry, and I didn't realize, and I should have asked you, and, but it was so out of character, but it's totally inappropriate. You don't ask for pictures, you don't ask for autographs. And the minute you do that, you've diminished yourself. That's the worst part, is that, and you've diminished your relationship with that person. And by the way, as a director, you're going in to people who hired you, so they're your boss, who are wildly talented, so you really respect and admire them and look up to them for that reason. As a human, I think everyone's equal, right? Or maybe not, but I don't, but still, so they're powerful people often, and they're used to getting their way, and so the fact that as a director, you have to tell them to do things and, have some gravitas in that, the minute you would say, and by the way, I'd like an autograph, you've lost your, any chance you have of being able to direct them is gone. So you can't do it.
Yeah. And I think, all part of the professionalism involved, all that you bring to it is, that kind of diminishes the experience. Let's see if we can take a peek at, let's try the Sizzle Reel and get a sense of the range of projects that you've worked on in terms of time and style and approach. So Matt, when ready, take it away. It's just this is all part of that behind the scenes.
Exactly. And you've been very kind in talking about, successes, and I feel very privileged and worked really hard and have had a lot, but I've had failures too, and lots. And I think that it's real, and how you deal with those is such an important part of, if there are students listening, and I know Tina has a very large population of students who follow her incredible work in the community she's created. And failure is a part of success. And the problem, as you said, as artists, we're so vulnerable, we're so sensitive. So it's not, I would never say to somebody, grow a thick skin, because I never have in all these years. I have very thin skin. The difference is you fall down, you bleed, you cry, you wash off the blood. The key is, I'm not saying don't be hurt, because you will. Some things stay hurting for a long time. But you get up and you keep walking and you put the Band-Aids on. And as we were talking about earlier, as you get older, you understand that you will survive those because you've survived so many of those. But, you know, I've had things that just went really badly, or the interview was horrible, or there were technical problems. And, you know, there's just only so much you can do, right? When there's a technical problem, if your camera breaks, if your audio isn't working, and, you know, if it's in the middle of a really big shoot where you've got a really big budget, and then it's just like, I mean, the sinking feeling in your stomach during something like that. And you do have to learn to, it's just part of life. I mean, life is not, anyway, my life certainly hasn't been, anybody I know isn't just like, whoa, it's all up, yay, we're getting better. You know, it's like this, you know, ups and downs, and, you know, hopefully you learn from. I used to always say to my staff when we'd have a staff meeting, if we did something where we really messed it up, and I would say, we're going to have two things. As soon as we figured out what the problem was, we're not going to point fingers or even, you know, dissect this. We're going to fix it. So number one, fix it. Number two, when it's fixed and we've solved it, we're going to all sit down together. Then we're going to dissect it. We're going to do a postmortem. And I would always say to them, so let's figure out why this mistake was made. And then next time, let's not make this mistake. Let's make a new one. Because we're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But let's learn not to do this specific mistake.
And, you know, I think we've talked on this show before about the ability to pivot and stay flexible in what you're doing. Is such a key part of kind of retaining your own perspective as you're moving ahead through challenging times, or the odd fluke that might happen. And you've talked also about persistence and staying persistent in the work that you do. Since this is an industry that has changed, there's been so much transition. Now moving into home entertainment as an industry is shifted to streaming, and is there still a demand for these stories behind the stories, and or as we move into other technologies with VR and new experiences, a higher level of quality to what we're doing? How has that transformed your industry, and how are you pivoting to address that?
Well, it's interesting because it really, you know, there was a time where it was pretty bad because DVD sales were decreasing, Blu-ray, all of that. And what the studios, the budgets were smaller. The number of people who were doing it was bigger. Mm-hmm. And the demand for it was less. So it was like, you know, it wasn't death, but it was like illness. And I kept thinking about that, you know, because I had transitioned my career so many times, you know, from radio to television, from rock and roll to film. And I'd learned how to reinvent myself or reinvent the company. And I was like, wow, I'm not exactly sure how to do, you know, how to navigate this now. And to be honest, that's still an issue because it's not what it was. But what was interesting, the way we've pivoted now is that we've become more involved in awards work, where when you submit for awards for the Annies, for the Visual Effects Society, for the Oscars, for the BAFTAs, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes storytelling that is required in those submissions. And they're quite complicated. And their rules are very, like the VES rules last year were 86 pages long. I haven't counted the pages this year. So, you know, we had been doing those submissions for the films we were on anyway, and we had the material, we knew the stories. So when DVD and Blu-ray became less of a market for us, somehow, luckily, that became a bigger one. And that was great. But there was a rocky period in there where it was like, you know, and I kept thinking, well, what, is the next step in this? And, I had people giving me lots of suggestions, which are good suggestions, that I didn't take. Finish your book. These are Don Hahn's suggestions. They're great suggestions. Finish your book. Finish your damn book. And, make some documentaries, because that's what really, that's what behind the scenes is. Like on the Blu-rays for Leica, those are full-on documentaries. I had a friend and client who called me several years ago, and a mutual friend of ours had passed away, and he was talking about doing a documentary on that person. And he said, do you want to get involved? Do you want to do it? I said, oh my God, yes, and I'll direct it. And he said, but Laura, you don't direct documentaries. And I said, well, yeah, that's what I do. And he said, well, what are you talking about? You do those behind the scenes things on Blu-rays and DVDs. And I said, yeah, those are documentaries. I said, what do you think those are? And he goes, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I guess you could direct it. But it's just like, sometimes people pigeonhole you. And speaking of people pigeonhole, this is something I want to say for the students or the people who are interested in, just general, what's important in a career, right? Some of the things you said, persistence is key. You just cannot give up, because sometimes you just, and you want to give up because it's like, how many times can they say no to me? But you keep going. And then passion, I think, is so important. Kindness is really important to me. And I think that's what makes success as a human. Not necessarily always the greatest financial success, but certainly I think success as a human is more important. But opportunities, taking opportunities. And like you said, when I was just talking about pigeonholing, when I've been so fortunate to work with the Beatles for literally my entire adult life. Mm-hmm. And I love the Beatles. Loved the Beatles when I was a kid, teenager. Love the Beatles now. There's no words to express the many layers of love I feel for them. And having worked with them, it is multi-layered, because they're real people. And then there's the music, and there's just so much. There's so much. But one of the millions of, one of the many millions of great things about working for them is that they had, particularly when Neil Aspinall was running their company, they just didn't have a lot of trust in a lot of people, because, they'd been burned and ripped off and blah, blah, right? So they really, trusting you was more important sometimes than what your actual skill level was. Not that they don't pick really good people, but they do. But so they were going to restore the film Help. And Neil asked me to restore the film Help. I'd never done a film restoration in my life. I knew basically nothing about film restoration, pretty much nothing. And, it's kind of a big deal to restore a film, and it's a Beatles film, and you love the Beatles, you want to do a great job. So of course, then again, I didn't say to him, well, no, I can't. Just what we were talking about earlier, no, I can't do it. You always say, yes, I can do it. And then you figure it out, right? So you take the opportunity, grab the opportunity. So of course I said yes. And then I did all this research, and I found the, people who do the technical work. And I looked at various people's work and chose who I liked, and, went back to Apple, the Beatles Apple, not Steve Jobs Apple, the original, and said, here are the budgets, here are the people I recommend. It was obviously, they had to say yes to my choice, or we don't want to use that person for whatever. Anyway, they went with my recommendation. And it's a very long project, and it's a very expensive project. So I kept sending, and by the way, I became quite good at it, I must say, but I kept sending Neil like samples of like, here's 5 minutes of the film before, and here's after. And notice how we did this, and then and here's what we did with the color. And he calls me up one day, he says, I will not repeat the obscenities because we're sharing with many people, but I'm getting all these, emails from you about, this part of the film is dirty, as in dirt on the film, right? And this part looks like this color is it. I don't care. I don't have time to look at this. I don't want to know. Stop sending me this stuff. Just do it. I trust you completely. You know what I want. You know what I like. Stay on budget. Do it on time. Just do it. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like, you're not, I mean, this is a big deal. And I'm spending a lot of money, and you finish and you don't like it. And when we were almost done, he came to LA and came to watch it. And I swear to you, I don't think I breathed during the entire 90 minutes we were watching the film, because I thought I had spent about 90% of the budget at that point. And I thought, well, if he doesn't like it, I'm like, what am I going to do? I mean, thank God. He liked it. I thought it was really good. But opportunity, you want to grab the opportunity. That's the thing. And then you need to learn, right? You need to figure out, like, if you don't know how to do it, just because you don't know how to do it. I mean, when you were born, what did you know how to do? You knew how to cry, and you knew how to do some bodily functions. And, that was basically it. So you learned everything you know how to do up till now, so you can still keep learning new things. It's okay. So you gotta be open to learning and to grabbing opportunities.
Yeah, trusting your own resilience and insight into being able to surround yourself with experts. Right. They do, and I think staying nimble in this industry too is key, all throughout whatever your career is, which leads us back to the pivot point. I'm getting word that we can begin to show. This is an EPK kit you did for the...
This is a featurette from the EPK for Yellow Submarine when it was re-released in 1999.
Okay.
Once upon a time. One. Or maybe twice.
Two.
There was a band.
You could pass for the original.
We are the original.
That changed the world.
We're Sergeant Pepper's Love.
Now they're back to take you on the trip of your life aboard the Yellow Submarine.
We all live in a yellow submarine.
Yellow Submarine deals with the Beatles as a kind of legendary characters, really. That's sort of what happens when you get into be an animated character. You're legendary immediately.
For me, the music is the legacy. And in this case, it's surrounded by film.
The animation was tailored to the music and the feelings that were about.
Well, lads, what do you think?
I think it stands up really well. It kind of seemed to me surprisingly modern.
Well, I think that...
It was very new and very innovative.
I just thought I was really good.
Yellow Submarine has been renovated and remixed for home video and DVD, filling your senses with its brilliant music and bright colours.
It's quite trippy.
Hello.
Groovy.
It's very 60s.
Taking you on an odyssey through exotic lands. Or seas.
Where are we?
A holy sea. Sea of holes.
This place reminds me of Blackburn, Lancashire.
Oh boy.
And telling you a simple but engaging story.
The baddies take the joy and the sound from the world, and we're brought in to help get it all back. And the battle ensues, and we win.
There are the bad guys.
Blue meanies!
Blue meanies!
Blue meanies?
Blue meanies! Oh, blue terrain.
I like the main Blue Meanie.
He's a damn blue meanie.
Has got a lovely voice.
I think I'd make a bull burger out of him.
I like the apple bonkers, actually, because they never say anything, do they? They don't. They just go along bonking people.
There are the good guys.
Those darn Beatles.
I'm glad we got cast as the goodies.
Now, whatever you do, don't touch that button.
Which button?
That one.
This one. All these kids would say, why did you press the button? That shoots me out.
That was the panic button.
John coming out of a Frankenstein monster. I thought it was good. It was quite witty, the way they did it.
What day is it? Saturday. Then George will be here. That's how I was, that's how I am. I still am on a mountain in India somewhere, basically in my heart.
I think everyone appeared quite interestingly, except me.
We've got to find Paul, haven't we?
I just walk out of the door.
And then there is that music.
Yeah, the music is the reason.
The long-lasting result of what we did is, you know, the love and the nice sounds.
You can talk to me. If you're lonely, you can talk to me.
Best group in the world.
As it's only a normal song.
Putting modesty aside, I think that the songs are really good. I think that's the backbone of it all.
All you need is love, love.
Classic animation with the Beatles music. All aboard the Yellow Submarine.
Such iconic artistry, work, music, time period, everything. My gosh, being entrusted with that. Ron Campbell's incredible direction on Yellow Submarine. He was a Disney animator and then went on and did quite a bit at Hanna-Barbera and other things. You know, that's got to feel a little maybe heady, but also weighty to be taking on some of these great iconic from the Beatles, either, you know, reintroducing to new audiences or, you know, sharing it with legions of fans around the globe, ensuring that you're being entrusted with that. That's a lot. And you don't want to mess with that. How do you get out of that?
You know, you're right. I mean, it's funny because I was thinking about this morning, that artists have this strange, again, balance, mix, right, of an incredible amount of confidence and complete insecurity. And it just kind of like goes like 49-51, right, all the time, where you think, you know, of course I can do this, blah, 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 versus, oh my God, what on earth am I insane to think I can do this? And like you said, when you have the experience of having done it many times, you feel more like, even when you're feeling the most insecure, you know, well, I've done it before and I felt this insecure before, so maybe it'll be okay. And you try to dial back your craziness, because there's a lot of craziness. I remember when I was working on the Beatles anthology, which was really, 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 like you said, really heavy, weighty wise and wonderful. Best job I ever had, ever. And I loved that job. But somebody called me from ABC, the ABC affiliate in Chicago, because we were supplying, ABC was running the show, so we were supplying little snippets and things for them, you know. And it was really late at night in London, and he said, don't you just feel like incredibly lucky to be working for the Beatles? And I said, it sounds so conceited, but I was really tired and I'd been working really hard. And believe me, I felt incredibly lucky, but that's not what I said. I said, well, I think they're incredibly lucky to have me. and it was just like, you know, and it really took him aback. And I said, you know, yes, of course I do. Of course I do. But what I brought to them that I did think was unique to me and was of value. I mean, you have to feel like you're bringing something of value, right? Was how much I loved them, how much I would do anything within my power to tell the story in the best way possible, to do it some justice. I mean, you can't, you know, that level of genius, you're not going to be that level of genius. You're just not. I mean, to even think you might, but to be able to, as you said at the beginning, pull the curtain back, share a little bit more of how that level of genius happened, of what they felt, you know. And the other thing that I felt like, so I brought the passion, I brought the love. I really actually loved them as people. At that point, I'd worked with them for many, many years, and I loved them as people, as well as the legacy, the music, the group. But, you know, and respect, you know, but I also brought that I did not have a personal agenda that was outside their personal agenda, their agenda. I did have a personal agenda because we all do and we should. But my personal agenda was to make it as fabulous as it could be and to try to, show that level of what they had to the best of my ability. And the other thing I brought to it that I think was really important and actually is one of the main reasons I was hired for that project was that I had relationships with each of them individually and less with John because, he had been gone, but I did know him a little. And I never was gearing it, to me it was, well, I always use the great joke that George Harrison told, which was, how many Beatles does it take to screw in a light bulb? 4, there were 4 of us. So it was never, John and Paul are more important or, the drummer isn't, or, it's like this was a unit and each member was equally weighted and deserved that. So I think that was something I brought that some people didn't, and part of it was because I lived through it. You know what I mean? I was there when it was happening as opposed to looking back on it.
Right.
Like our Matt, who said he was born in 1982 here, so I was a teenager during those years. And so I remembered that there wasn't that delineation then. Yeah. They were, Mick Jagger called them the 4-headed monster. So yeah, I mean, my work with them over the years is so precious to me.
I think that lends itself to your strength as someone who lived through and experienced their music and the impact of their music, and then came to work with them in bringing your skills to what you do. I love the moment that you captured with Paul talking about, setting all modesty aside, there's great music in there. And it is. And, what a great moment that he may not have been as free to convey or might even kind of come to mind had he not been in a circumstance with someone he could feel comfortable to say that. And I think you spoke about that earlier, about that ability to make people feel comfortable, that you are in their home and in their space, and being respectful and mindful of that.
And it doesn't hurt to actually like the art. I've had people say to me, oh, you're such a fan, like in a dismissive way. And I think, so you want somebody talking to you about your work who doesn't like your work? I mean, does that make sense? Or you'll love this story, and I won't name names again, but I was talking to someone who was relatively new at Disney at the time and said how unbelievably thrilled I was that I had been able to work with 4 of the original 9 Old Men, which I just found such a privilege, And this person looked at me blankly. And I said, you do not know who the 9 Old Men are, do you? And this person said, no, but I think it's really cute that you do, and you think it's such a big deal. And I thought, wow, again, you're so lucky that I'm the one doing these pieces and not you, because you should know who they are and you should care. And it was just one of those, like, I think it's an advantage to like the art. I've worked on movies I haven't liked, and I do bring my best that I can to it, but it's not quite the same. By the way, I've been really lucky. That's rare. I mostly like the movies.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, this speaks to the placement of you and your work and the background that you bring to it, this as an educator, and others where you do the work. I try to do the work behind, so I can speak a little more knowledgeably about the questions I'm asking and the place and point and purpose of why we're having a conversation, and come at it with a bit. But there's nothing worse than sitting down with someone who hasn't read your book, and they're going to ask you questions about it, and you're like, you haven't read it, have you? Oh yeah, it's a big book, I don't want to. Okay, well, so it changes the tenor of the exchange. And I think, again, that's a great strength of what you bring, is your vast experience. And this speaks to the issue of ageism as we move through this industry, and how people think that being young and hip and into pop culture is going to get you to know everything, and maybe not.
I find it what you're talking about. If you're going to interview someone and you haven't read the book, watched the movie, whatever that is, I think that's so disrespectful, not just of that person, but of yourself. Why are you there if you're not willing to do your best? You haven't respected yourself by not preparing. And I have seen that many, many times. And we were so lucky because John Lasseter, again, recommended us to Studio Ghibli and said, when Disney was doing the English language versions, I would really like Laura and L.E.G to be the ones doing those behind the scenes and those interviews. And, I did not know, I have to admit, a lot about Miyazaki's work at that time, nor did all of my staff. So I went out and bought books about Miyazaki, and it was an assignment at work, and they could do it during work hours. We all read the book. And then we went out and got all of the DVDs in Japanese with the subtitles and watched all the films. There's a huge amount of work. But I wasn't going to go in to Miyazaki-san and be like, this is, and again, I respect myself too much for that. I wanted to do a great job. And it was fantastic because I became, quite the Miyazaki expert because I really did a huge amount of research and work. And he was, and he's such a master and he's so revered in our industry. And he was so happy. And by the way, he doesn't suffer fools gladly. Yeah. And I had been told that he would kick people out if he didn't like the interviews, and I saw it happen. And, it was great for me because I had the rare opportunity of working directly with him twice because he almost never leaves Japan. And as you, I'm sure know, he doesn't speak English. So, and they told me every 10 minutes, he's going to ask you to leave the room or you can stay, but he needs a cigarette break. So again, being respectful, I was paying attention, during my first interview with him. And at 10 minutes, I was kind of like, I said, well, they said, whatever, it was time for my next question. And I said, well, I want to make sure that I'm not encroaching on his time. Does he want to smoke a cigarette? And, or I said it to him. I didn't, do you want to smoke? And he said, and of course, the interpreter, no, he's having too much fun enjoying this conversation so much. He wants to keep talking. And then we were at the Toronto Film Festival. And this is on film somewhere in the Disney archive if they didn't lose it, right? Why didn't I make a copy? He and John Lasseter did the line together. They came and they're talking and Miyazaki says, this is Laura Gross. She does these great interviews. John Lasseter says, I know, I'm the one who told them to hire her for you. She's the best. And there's John Lasseter and Miyazaki-san saying how good I am at my job. And I'm just like, oh my God. I mean, I'm not usually starstruck, but I do have this respect. And, these are two like amazing giants. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, you just want to sort of freeze that moment, have a little tape of it, and maybe play it every time you're feeling totally insecure, which is once or twice or 20 times a day, It's just like, oh my God.
I think those are the golden moments in a career where it isn't always going to be about the awards or anything, but when you reach those moments, those are worth treasuring.
It's all about the moments and not the awards to me.
Yeah.
It's the moments. Yeah. The moments that you connect as a human.
Yeah. Makes all the difference.
Those are the most precious.
Matt, we've got a few questions coming in. I want to jump to Matt and we'll field a few of those.
Yeah, I think, let's see, the first question here is, what is the one quality you have that you think is good, that one thing that just keeps you going?
Wow, that's a good question. I guess ultimately it is passion. I love the work so much, and I love the artists. Maybe I don't even love the artists so much as the artistry. Like sometimes the artists can be not so nice. Mostly they are, but they're people. So I think it's the passion, how much I love the art. And, it's a way of being like, I can't draw and I can't, do CG and I can't make great music, but I get to be a part of that world by doing what I do. And I actually think what I do has value. So it's not like I'm just a hanger on, because it is still storytelling, and it's important storytelling. It's storytelling that's going to live long past me, so, and, as Mindy said, when you're working with great, when you're doing stories about Ivan Durrell and, the Beatles and Frank and Ollie, and those are stories that are going to be important to people long after all of us are gone, because that art is going to live on. So I think it's the passion and respect. It's a great question.
Mm-hmm. What else?
Tim in the chat is wondering where we can find your interview with Miyazaki.
That's a really great question for which I do not have a good answer. Those were done for promotion of the English language versions of the Miyazaki films that were put out on DVD by Disney in the, I'm going to guess 90s, maybe early 2000s, but in that time period.
Because I'd worked one of the, Ponyo, a couple of the later ones, and there was a huge reissue at that time. So there
Right. Well, we worked on quite a few of them. The interview was for Spirited Away.
Oh yeah.
And then we did another. We had the producer who produced all those films and who has since passed. And I am trying to think of his name. This is terrible, but
they likely live on some of those early DVD releases.
They may, but mostly what we did was called Behind the Microphone. So it was about the voice sessions. So they may just be in the archives. I wish I had a good answer for that. And I wish I had those.
Yeah.
Nowadays I try to keep a copy of what I've worked on just so that but sometimes you can't, because there's just so much. I mean, Coraline, I was on that for 4 years. That was right before you started shooting digitally. I had over 400 tapes. I couldn't keep copies of 400 tapes.
Well, that speaks to, again, the versatility of what you're doing. Anything on live action, it's a much shorter window and time frame to get what you need to get. But with animation, you've got a longer process involved. And in the case of Coraline and other films that you've worked on, you're brought in very early and then coming back to visit to keep getting the story. How do you keep that fresh? How do you keep the through lines consistent in terms of your vision of what kind of story you want to be telling?
Well, you asked earlier about like how the process works, and if you're lucky, you get to present ideas of what the pieces should be, right? Then if you're really lucky, like we talked about with the fish, in Nemo, you find stories as you're working. And so you're always trying to, as you're going through the process, you're like, oh, there's this part we didn't ask about because we didn't realize, so that you want to keep, you want to make sure you have a whole story. So that keeps it exciting. And the more you learn about it, I find the more you learn about it, the more excited you get. Mm-hmm. By the way, I think filmmakers, a lot of the reason they like this process is that they feel that the audience has even greater respect for the work when they see how hard it is. Mm. And, I remember John Lasseter talking about, seriously, I am not, because somebody said to me, well, you're exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. This is true. About a piece of dust that was floating down in the corner of Andy's bedroom during Toy Story 2. And that he thought it was a little too obvious or a piece of dust in the corner of the shot, And I just thought, oh my God, like how do you, this is like amazing amount of detail that they have to pay attention to. So stuff like that to me is so fascinating. And a lot of people really like behind the scenes. Some people maybe aren't fans. I went to a cousin's birthday party in Detroit once, and a guy I was talking to, I said, what do you do for a living? He was a dentist. He's asked, what did I do? And I said, well, I make the behind the scenes on DVDs. And he said, wow, do you think anybody ever watches those? And I said, well, yes, I do. And thank you for dismissing my entire career in one question. But actually, people do, and often like them. So, and I do think get a greater understanding. I know I get a greater understanding. Mm-hmm. So I think that they get a greater understanding of what goes into it, and then they appreciate it that much more.
And it's kind of a great sort of passive film school in a way for the average listener. And I think it helps to elevate, has been a big part of elevating viewers who are much more sophisticated in what they're watching and why. And it's raised the bar on what filmmakers and visual effects artists and creatives need to do to, again, push boundaries with storytelling and to get our audiences to come along for the ride and suspend their disbelief when we do pull back the curtain and get to see that's how that was done. Oh my gosh. But it then forces the other end of that to be that much more creative. So I've always loved that companionship between the original story and how that story came to be. And you've masterfully handled that. Matt, let's go to, I think we've got a few more questions, a little more time. Let's get a couple more.
Yeah, this next question is asking, where do you find your inspiration for making your making of films so unique to each project?
I think that's from talking to the filmmakers and finding out what stories they want to tell. And then, you watch the film, or the film, a lot of times the film isn't done, right? So you watch the animatic, or you read the script and you come up with ideas. And, so it's the best. I mean, again, it's different with every project, but the best way to do this is collaboratively, for them to be willing to listen to your ideas, but for you to also want to know what they're trying to, what's important to them to tell. And then what you think is important to tell. Sometimes I was telling Mindy this on the phone last week that, there was something where the director didn't want to do a specific thing. And I said, with all due respect, and I had great respect for and really like this director, I don't think that's the best decision. Here's why. You can't just say, well, here's my idea. And, I think that it would be really good to do this because, and if you give them a reason that makes sense, and they're relatively reasonable people, they're generally going to go along with it, unless they're like totally like, no, if I said no, it's no, And this person said, you're right. And then had the grace later in the process to come to me much later, a couple months later, and say, boy, I'm so glad I listened to your advice. But it has to be for their benefit. It can't be because you think it's a great idea. It has to be you think it's a great idea because it's going to help promote the film, or it's going to tell a better story about the film, or it's a story that's really important, or it's a story that resonated so much with the people who watched it that maybe as filmmakers, they were so close to it, they didn't even realize, those kinds of things. So I don't know if I really answered that question appropriately, but I hope I did.
No, I think that was great. Thank you.
And keep going. We've got a few more.
Let's see. The next one here is asking, what advice do you have for someone wanting to start their own production studio?
Well, I think my first piece of advice is don't listen to people who tell you you can't do it. If I tell you how many times people told me I couldn't do things I wanted to do, if I'd listened to them, I would have done nothing. Because people are always going to give you 1,000 reasons, and their reasons might be perfectly logical. You just have to believe in yourself and keep going. So I think persistence. And I do think that ability to get up and brush yourself off after being hurt, rejected, denied. And by the way, that doesn't stop. I used to think, well, now I've gotten to this level, so that's going to stop. Oh, no. That never stops. And sometimes the more up you get in your career, the harder those things are, because you're playing in the big leagues and they're throwing hard balls. And man, when they hit you with a hard ball and it's a really like major league player, it hurts a lot more than when it was softball you were playing and they lobbed it at you, So I think that, the ability to recover from that hurt and learn from it.
What do you do for that kind of resilience? What kinds of things do you do?
Well, I used to be worse than I am now. I think I've learned to be a little more mature. I sort of like go through this like spiral down of, oh my God, everything's horrible. I'm never going to work again. This person hates me. All the insecurity of any neurotic artist. And then, ultimately, God willing, you just actually life goes on and you kind of get past it. But like I say, some hurts. I mean, there are things that have happened that I still feel bad about, still feel hurt about, betrayals. People can do that. We know that people are people. Like, I don't want to say this industry because you think there aren't betrayals if you're a lawyer or, I think any industry, humans are human and they do really wonderful, amazing, generous, kind things. And they can do really petty, mean, and unkind things. And so I guess it's back to what Mindy said earlier, just when you've had a lot of experiences, you do learn that you can recover. But it's harder in the beginning. It's like the first time you break up with a boyfriend or he breaks up with you, and you think that's it, I'm never going to love again, and it's all over. And once you've had your heart broken a couple times and you realize you did survive, then maybe the next time your heart's broken, even though it feels horrible, you at least think, but I'm going to survive. I'm in it's the old, see the light, at the end of the tunnel and hope it's not from an oncoming train.
Well, and I know that you take walks along the ocean and you get involved with civic kinds of things. I think sometimes as creatives, when you take the heat off of some sort of angst or frustration and refocus and regenerate those creative juices again, it allows you to reapproach. Sometimes stepping away, I think, is really a key thing.
I think that's true.
And I know you're often posting beautiful photos of your walks along the shore and other things that help to restore who you are. And I think that's an important thing as creatives to find whatever that is that, as driven as we are to create and we gain much from that, we also need to be protective of that and to find ways to preserve that, restore it, rejuvenate it at times.
I agree. And, on the civic engagement, I've been very involved, in our democracy. And I encourage everyone to vote. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. Register and vote. That certainly puts things in perspective a lot of times because, those issues are bigger.
Yeah.
Than, and so sometimes I just think like, okay, but I wasn't always that involved. So
we learn as we grow and we find ways to step away and then reapproach with a better perspective.
Right.
Stronger, I think.
And if you can corral yourself away from that, that angst, yeah. It's because that's so not productive. Yeah. If there's a way to do that. But again, you're human, you're an artist, you're sensitive. You're gonna go through it. You're just gonna go through it.
Yeah. And again, community is always a great thing, which is why we're doing what we do here through the great folks of CTN and the wonderful resources they have here too to help maintain and sustain through challenging times for other creatives. I see a few more questions. Matt, let's jump in.
Yeah, this next question is from Mark in the chat, who says that they did a series of interviews about their animation earlier this year, and they felt like they came across quite shy in the interviews. They're wondering if you had any tips for presenting yourself in front of a camera and getting out of your head and remaining composed.
Good question.
That is a good question. I think try to find an interviewer you feel really comfortable with so that the camera almost disappears and that you're having a real conversation and not just a Q and an A and a Q and an A, where it's just like, and also somebody who listens to you. Because if they're just looking at their questions.
Oh, yes. That's a really strong point. I've had that happen where I've been interviewed and I'm looking at the top of someone's head because their nose is buried in their notes. You need to be able to be connecting. I think that's a really great, strong suggestion, Laura. Any other tips that you have for creatives too? Because we're the last to want to be able to talk about our work, and so what you do is so unique. What can be done for creatives to help promote themselves, to have a good sizzle reel, to have a good visual portfolio, or take some classes in being comfortable in front of the camera, or other tips that they might have?
Or media training, that's obviously you've got to have a little bit of money for that. But we've done media training for various executives in the past. And I think, kind of thinking ahead of what you want to present and having a clear picture, but being willing to pivot if something more interesting happens. Like, I'll give a great example of pivoting. We were doing the Waking Sleeping Beauty DVD bonus features with our friend and one of the great talents of the entire world, Don Hahn. We're both so lucky to be friends with him. And so I had Kirk Wise and Rob Minkoff back to back. And there were makeup chairs, right? So Kirk was leaving and Rob was coming in, and they were both sitting together in the makeup chairs. And, you know, I come out and kind of listen to what's going on, right? And they were saying, oh, God, it's been a long time since I've seen you. What's new? And as they're talking to each other, I realized they've known each other for forever, actually since junior high school. Mm-hmm. And I was like, how long have you guys known each other? And they tell me, well, we knew each other in junior high, and we actually made a little animated short together when we were in junior high. And I was like, okay, put the makeup back on Kirk. I yell into my cameraman, set up the lighting for a 2-shot. I said, we got to tell this story. This is a great story. So this was just like, you know, pivot. Like, this was not what we were ever intending. I didn't have any questions for this because I didn't know this existed. But it was such a, again, grabbing an opportunity. It was such a great opportunity. And we get the two of them sitting down and they tell this story. And it's so funny because they're like, and we even had music that went with it. They both go, do you remember the music? No, I don't remember the music. And then they start singing it. It's like so hilarious. No, I don't remember the music. And they're singing it. It's, by the way, if anybody wants to see it, it's called The Reunion. It's on the Waking Sleeping Beauty DVD that you can see. I know where that is, not the Miyazaki stuff. But it just was like so awesome. And that was a pivot. And they left and I called Don. I was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing, you know. And it was just like this jewel. So I think, you know, knowing what you want to tell, but also being open to maybe the interviewer asks you a question you wouldn't have thought of.
Well, I think also cultivating talking points. I know when we were working and doing a lot of our early animation work together, I was always calling together, you know, what is our message, what are our talking points, and providing that for talent so we could get our message across. But I think when you are working to speak about your own projects and your own creativity, it takes a little bit to kind of distill that down to what is my pointed message, what do I want to be saying. And it's hard sometimes as creatives to articulate that, but it's a good exercise to sit down and create, you know, what is the log line of what I do as an artist? What is, what is my story as a creative and my contributions to this project? And when you've got a handle on that, it makes sitting down in this kind of a context as an interviewer and an interviewee, it's a little bit easier to know, okay, well, these are the points of what I want to share, what I want to talk about. And it might make you feel a little less stilted or shy about it when you come in with a little bit, not a script necessarily, but a sense of what do I need to communicate here? What's the essence of what I want to get across?
I think that's really good, yeah.
You know, you and I both have done interviews where you have to sometimes draw it out of them and come around and ask that question about 3 or 4 different ways to get the answer you need. But then also where you can sit down with a true pro and you can bang that interview out and they're right there with their answers. So I think it speaks to your skills in the incredible career you've shaped to be able to do that, to kind of read who you're speaking with and understand that they're maybe not as comfortable. What can I then do to draw out from them to make the experience a little more, as you say, a little bit more in their home?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Matt, I see a few more questions here. Let's jump in with that.
I saw one pop up on the chat that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, Tim's asking, have you ever worked with or under someone that you really dislike their character?
That was the one that I saw. Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. And then, and is his if so, what do you do about it?
Yeah, how do you navigate the cooperation, or what mindset is needed for that type of situation?
Yeah.
Well, that's, you know what? I have many times. It's tough. It depends on the specific situation. if you're in an interview, you know it's not going to last all the rest of your life or, you know, the next 2 years, then, you know, you can just kind of do the best you can and muddle through. Sometimes you can turn it around. I've had that happen. If it's someone you're working for and you really don't like them, probably they really don't like you. It's pretty likely, because I generally like people. So, yeah, I don't know what to say about that. You just, you know, I often think I don't have to be friends with these people. I don't have to even respect them. I just have to do the job. But boy, that's not fun. It's so much more fun when you like them. Then I can tell you one story that I think is a good story, where I went and I had a really, really horrible night the night before and hadn't had any sleep. And I won't go into the details, but it was a really bad night. And I had an early morning-ish, you know, like probably 10, but it was a rock star interview with this rock star. And he was so obnoxious and horrific. And I normally just kind of put up with it because it's my job, right? But I was really, really tired and I had a really, really bad night. And I just thought, you know what? I don't actually have to sit here and go through this. So I said to him very sweetly, "Are you having a really bad day?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "You know what? So am I." And I said, "Do you want to turn this around so that maybe you and I could have a really good day? Or should I leave?" Because I was not going to stay and have him be awful, you know? And he just looked at me. And you know, they're not used to being talked to like that, I have to tell you, especially by interviewers, you know? And he said, "Yeah, I want us to have a really good day." And that was it. We had a great interview. Everything was fine. That doesn't always happen. And he could have said, "Get out of here." And I would have understood. And I also had an experience with somebody who was also very tired and had his daughter had a slumber party, and he'd been up all night the night before. She was 11, and he was exhausted, and he was a little grumpy. I mean, he was not, this other guy was horrible. This guy was like a little bit grumpy, not bad at all. And, you know, I worked around that, you know, he kind of barked at me a couple times, and I kind of said, "Oh, don't take it out on the poor EPK producer if you're mad at the studio," you know, kind of like a little sympathy. And, you know, he could have again said, "Well, I don't really care," but he was really nice. And that turned around immediately. And he wasn't even that bad. He was just a little bit grumpy. I mean, people are people. They're entitled to be a little grumpy. So it went great. We had a fabulous interview. Everything was fabulous. This is a big, big, big movie star. And, you know, I got amazing material, more than I expected. He did all kinds of promotional stuff that we didn't think he would do. And I saw him, I'm going to say 6, maybe 8 weeks later at the junket. And I was the last interview of his day. And he said, "Oh my God, Laura, I'm so glad you're here. I saw your name was here. I've been waiting all day to see you." And I said, "Really? Thank you. Why?" You know, because I'm like, "Really?" And he said, "I have to apologize to you because I was really tired that day and I was sort of a jerk." And I said, "You were really tired and you were a little bit grumpy and you got over it right away. So you really don't have to apologize." And he said, "Well, I've been waiting all day to apologize." I thought, what a mensch. Like, you know, he remembered, you know, I mean, or even remembered my name. I mean, you can work with people 20 times and they don't remember your name, you know. He remembered, he was thinking about it, he wanted to apologize. And again, I mean, he was grumpy, like on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 1. It was so minor and so short. But it just shows you that, you know, sometimes you just have to work with people. And you know what? I've had a few that have just been obnoxious from start to finish. And, you know, you're just like,
I think
that's
that
life.
speaks to the skill of cultivating this ability to stay versatile, to sort of read the sense of the person you're interviewing, who you're connecting with, and getting the job of telling the story accomplished. That's a lot to juggle, but again, your years of experience speak so well to that. Just in winding down here, Matt, I want to make sure, did we get all our questions covered on the...
Yeah, we just got from Tim saying very helpful for sharing your story with us. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate people listening, and I'm glad they think it's interesting enough to stay. because I tell you, Mindy, as I said before, has just been such an incredible force in the animation industry, and really showing how important women were in the industry when they were the unsung heroes. That's just so great for women, for artists. And I got to say about Tina, like what she's done just blows me away, how she's created this nurturing community that has so much respect for her, and really, she's just created this sort of bubble of nurturing and caring and sharing the art in a way that is, and she did it all by herself. I mean, I'm not saying she didn't have people who she brought in, but she chose those people and brought them in. That is not easy to do, to create something like this out of nothing. And I have huge respect for both these women and feel very privileged to have been here with them.
Well, a great joy and a great delight to be able to cast a light on someone who has spent their career casting a light on others. Always a joy. One final question from me. What stands out for you? I know there's still loads of things ahead in your career, but in all that you've accomplished, what stands out for you as a personal, I hate to say highlight, but something that has really touched you the most personally?
Well, it's definitely the work with the Beatles. I mean, there's no, the Beatles anthology was, always will be. I mean, God willing, I have wonderful things ahead. There will never be anything to come close. There just won't. And I often tell this story that I was so glad to be a part of that. I can't even begin to tell you. And I was in London, and it was an 18-month job. And my mom was, at the time, had a stroke, was severely disabled, and I was overseeing all her care. So they wanted me to come and stay there for 18 months, and I couldn't. And the generosity and kindness that they showed me, they flew me back and forth for 18 months.
Wow.
And would say, when you need to go back, if something comes up with your mom, that's okay. And paid for everything. I mean, it was amazing. It would never happen today. Never happen today. But I tell this story of, I'm in the back of a taxi at the end of the 18 months, and we're done, and everything's done. And I'm crying because it's over. And I knew all along it was like the greatest thing that could ever happen to me. And the taxi driver he's like, "Oh, love, why are you crying?" And I said, "Well, I just finished a job, and I'm never going to have a job that's better than this ever." And he's like, "Oh, love, that's not true. You're young. You'll have great jobs. You'll have better jobs. Don't be ridiculous. You don't need to cry, love. No, nothing will ever be better." He says, "Well, what was the job?" And I said, "Well, I've just finished 18 months on the Beatles anthology." He's real quiet, and he goes, "Oh yeah, you're right. You'll never have anything better than that." Well, of course, I had to stop crying because I had to laugh. And I just think it was so perfect, but it was true. I just thought, and it's funny because many, many years later, I was somewhere, I can't remember where, with Sean Lennon, and I told him that. I couldn't stop laughing. He's like, "I can't believe the guy said that." I said, but it was just, he said, it's a great story. So yeah, the Beatles anthology, but just, I mean, that's the career one. The fact that I was able to develop those relationships, and not just with those particular amazing, brilliant, talented, incredible men, but the people around them who are just so smart and so wonderful, and so many of them are gone now.
Yeah.
But those relationships, that's the most precious, is those relationships. And there were just they surrounded themselves by amazing people. So I feel just so privileged to have been a part of that. That's my, but you know what? I love Toy Story 2 was incredible. Coraline was incredible. Waking Sleeping Beauty was incredible. Surf's Up, one of my favorite projects ever. And again, all of those, I have continued relationships with those people, or most of those. So that's, if you're lucky enough to do such a good job and understand them in a way that they then become, if not your friends, at least friendly colleagues, that's pretty special.
And I think that's a key to longevity, is cultivating strong relationships and certainly reputation in the work that you do, but the relationships behind that speak volumes. Laura, thank you. It is my great
Thank you.
to have a wonderful work relationship with you for many years, and it's a great joy to be able to, as I said, cast a light on someone who spent the better part of her career casting light on others. So it's about time.
Thank you.
You for all the amazing work you've done. So thank you for spending time with us today, and thank you to everybody who's tuned in this week. We will be back next week and in the following weeks. Check the schedule. Tina and the amazing team at CTN have pulled together some more incredible talent. So we'll see you next week here on Primary Sources. Be sure to check out further details in the chat. Thank you again, Laura. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.